So something I want to talk about, of course, in this video is, of course, the question of, was Shalltear at fault for what happened during the events of Volume 3 or the late part of Season 1, where, of course, Shalltear Bloodfallen was mind-controlled by a world-class item. And from one perspective, yes, some people could argue that, yes, she is partially at fault. She allowed herself to be put in a vulnerable position where she was coaxed out of course, the area that she was in into an open area where, of course, there were people waiting to ambush her and to basically use the world-class item to gain control over her mind and then turn her against, of course, Nazarick. But the counter argument to that, and this is something that I more lean towards, is that this actually falls more on Irons. Irons is someone that is very paranoid, and especially at the beginning of the story in Volume 1, he is insanely paranoid. He's doing everything in his power to be as cautious as possible, putting things in place, doing certain things, gaining intel, manipulating situations to the best of his advantage, and one of the big rookie mistakes is making the assumption that, of course, this new world that he is in doesn't have world-class items, even though he discovered in Volume 1 that they had spells that came from, of course, Yggdrasil. So if you see that a world that you've just gone into has spells from Yggdrasil, the game that he is playing, then it is safe to make the assumption that there could be a higher possibility that there are other things from that game that are, of course, in this new world. And the fact that he just made the assumption of sending Shalltear or any of his, of course, companions or followers that are doing his bidding, you know, the Floor Guardians themselves, all the Pleiadian Maids, Sebas in particular, of course, Riv, of course, one of the Pleiadian Maids, the fact that he's sending them out there on their own without something to counter a world-class item, which, yes, he does have, which is, of course, another world-class item, he is putting them in a vulnerable position to, of course, be influenced by whatever these other items are out there. Again, it may not just be the one that was used on Shalltear. There might be a number of other world-class items out there that could be used to negatively impact, of course, the tomb itself, or particularly, of course, the other members out there that are doing reconnaissance missions, assassinations, whatever the task requires from Irons. So, in my opinion, I believe Irons is at fault. For someone that is as paranoid as he is, he made a very fundamental flaw in his judgment, which he does openly admit and goes, you know, he gets pretty irate, basically saying, you know, why did he not think of this possibility that other world-class items could be in this world? Maybe it's just that assumption that he had this arrogantness of that, you know, that because they're so rare, that there's no possibility that they could have also been in this world because of how rare they are. But again, that's making an assumption. And as one of my sayings goes, assumption is the bane of all stupidity itself. Because if you make an assumption, you're leading yourself into a false sense of security. And I think that is one of the big issues that he had here, which adds for some interesting character because, of course, it means that he's not perfect. Again, as much as he is paranoid, there are still flaws in his paranoia. And that is something that constantly develops and grows as time goes on. And that's why I find this particular topic interesting, because I don't believe Shalltear is at fault, because again, she is just following direct orders to do exactly, and Irons could have put better things in place to protect her. At the same time, yes, you could also argue that she shouldn't have been so reckless, but at the same time, that again follows down to her abilities and how she functions as a Floor Guardian and her very strong 1v1 capabilities and how she is very good at, of course, taking out individuals. But Irons could have possibly picked someone a little bit more covert for that operation. So again, it's not just a matter of the assumption of there not being any world-class items, but also the idea that he could have maybe picked someone else that maybe could have been better suited. Maybe Shalltear was the best person for the job and all he needed to do was give her a world-class item and that would have solved all the problems. That also being said, how would have that situation played out differently if she had a world-class item, countered that mind manipulation, and would have it turned out differently? Would have they used some other type of thing to try and, you know, gain an edge or maybe possibly hurt her a little bit? I think she would have just mopped the floor completely and wiped them all out, because again, Shalltear is insanely powerful, and I feel like the only reason why those individuals ever gained a leg up is because of that world-class item. Again, I'm trying to look at both perspectives. I'm trying to look at what if they did overpower, but also what if she overpowered, and try and weigh them up and go, well, this is what I think, this is what I don't think. So again, for those that are assuming that I'm going on one side, like for example, Shalltear could have been beaten by them, no, I don't believe that's the case, but it is an interesting thing to just kind of think about the possibility, debate it for a short period, and then come up with a conclusion of where, of course, that stands. So of course, you don't have to agree with me on that opinion, and I personally just really love Shalltear. I think she is a fascinating character. I think there are some interesting layers that build on her as time goes on because of this major event. I feel like this particular event very much shapes who she is, and I think it's also something that Irons tries to teach them over time to try and be independent in how they think. Maybe Shalltear should have said something like, hey, maybe I should take a world-class item just in case there's another one out there. But again, the other issue though too is ever questioning Irons is always seen as bad, even though Irons is constantly saying, hey, if you've got a better idea than me, suggest it. But at the same time, they either see that as, you know, going against Irons' wishes, or also the fact that he's deliberately come up with some plan that's going to play out in a certain way because he's all-knowing. And that's what also adds into the fun comedic aspect, is that they just assume everything he does, whether it's good or bad, is some part of a master plan, and sometimes it goes to his advantage and sometimes not so glamorous. So I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Where do you stand on it? And if, for example, you think, you know, look at the other side of the argument or the other side of the coin and think, well, how could have Shalltear prevented this situation? And then also, how could have Irons prevented this situation in different sort of layers, not just maybe a world-class item. Maybe he could have sent someone else out there just to oversee things and make sure that they work closely behind Shalltear, keeping an eye on her and keeping her in check. Because again, one of the things you've also got to realize is one of her abilities basically turns her into, you know, crazy out of control, and she does lose those senses because of the blood that she's consuming. And when she uses it, yeah, she goes completely wonkers in a frenzy, and that takes away a lot of that thought process that she probably should have had. I know some people might just argue that she's just as dense as a rock, but I believe that, again, with a little bit more thought process, maybe she could have navigated around that situation better. But at the same time, as Irons shortly after does, he makes sure that he puts in world-class items for all the floor guardians and etc. to make sure that they are in a safer position. And he also does try to be a little bit more paranoid in making sure he doesn't put them in completely vulnerable situations. So again, love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Check out my other playlists to do with Overlord and of course some of the light novel stuff. Of course, I will be continuing to do light novel breakdowns as new volumes come out in Japan. I'll be reading the Japanese volumes, continuing to do breakdown analysis videos, so definitely check out the playlists for, of course, more Overlord content. But again, I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.